Jesus ever laughed? Please help me welcome Phil Brady.
Good morning, fellow Toastmasters.
Good morning.
Guests. So at my Wednesday night Bible study a couple months back, Kelly says, I got a question. That's how we talk down here in the South. We don't just ask the question. We introduce the question. She said, do y'all think that Jesus ever laughed or horsed around or picked on anybody or just had fun? Because it seems like the scriptures are so serious. That's my best impersonation, Kelly from Burgaw. So we had this discussion. Did Jesus ever laugh? And we decided after a brief discussion that Jesus indeed did laugh, that the Son of God loved the disciples and he loved humanity so much that his love came out in many forms, but in laughter as well. And I think Jesus was the kind of person he was the leader of the disciples of the group, so he always kind of kept something going. And one of the disciples, and there were 12 of them, and plus him and followers, if they're traveling along, and you know how people are when they travel, they don't always get along. They don't always have books to read. They don't always get along. And so one of them would go off and just on his own, puffing away mad, and Jesus would run up, tackle them, roll around with them, hold on to them, tickle them until they started laughing, and then they could come back into the fold. So I think that may help answer the question. I think Jesus was also someone who he wouldn't pick on somebody, but he would point out things about them in a loving manner that boosted their self-esteem. I think if somebody started picking on Simon about his big ears, he would say, well, God gave Simon big ears that he may hear the word. Would everybody have ears like Simon? And Simon was like, all right, what he said. But I think Jesus was also a practical joke. I think Jesus was the kind of person that he would do a practical joke, but in an instructive manner to get a point across. In the scriptures, it talks near the end of Jesus' life that he was going into Jerusalem and he was going to ride this donkey into Jerusalem, and he had instructed two of the disciples to go. It was to go over to this nearby village. There'll be a man and there'll be a colt tied to a post. Untie the colt and bring it back. And as the two disciples left, I could just see Jesus laughing. And they said, Jesus, what's so funny? You see these two guys with me? I told them to go get the colt and untie it. But I told the owner of the colt, put 40 knots in the rope tying the colt. And so the two disciples come up and they see this, start untying the guy, says, would you look at this? There are 40 knots in this rope. I bet Jesus did that. That's just like something Jesus would have done. And the other disciple here says, here, let me help you out here. He said, this is probably a significance. Jesus doesn't do anything by accident, so there's probably a significance to this. Jesus spent 40 days in the wilderness with no food. I think we can untie 40 knots. Besides, you better be glad he wasn't thinking about 7 times 70, or the Passover would have come and gone, and we'd still be here untying this rope. Jesus would personalize his humor too. He wouldn't say these 3 Jews walked into a bar. He would have said, Sue Waller, Rich Wiseman, and Stephanie Tabashnik walked into this ENC. I'll finish that there, please. I think Jesus did a lot of things. And he instructed using humor, which is very important when you're teaching. It seems like that Jesus did things in such a way that to let people know that the gospel was full of joy. I had imagined that Jesus would, in the evenings, they would be sitting around and passing the time in the evening. Perhaps the lamps are lit and they're playing cards. Now maybe they didn't have actual cards to hold in their hand. Perhaps they were just small clay tiles that had pictures drawn on them that had been baked. I can see Jesus standing there holding these tiles in his hand. And he looks over at Matthew and he says, Matthew, give me all your sheep. And Matthew says, well, Jesus, I don't have any sheep. You're going to have to go fish. Jesus says, okay, but it's going to be a lot of fish. Here's a tip for you. Unless you have a barn full of house-altered cornmeal and are prepared to clean and cook fish to feed 5,000 people, don't ask Jesus to go fish. Did Jesus ever laugh? I think indeed he did. Mr. Toastmaster.
Thank you very much, Phil.